Welcome to In the Desert of Set, a pagan and occult website by G.B. Marion. I'm G.B. Marion. I write about life as a polytheist in contemporary times with random, long-winded detours into ancient history, classic horror movies, and all kinds of other fun stuff. Won't you join me for today's adventure? If you'd like to read a free electronic print copy of the following recording, please visit desertofset.com. Set and the Greek Typhon. Are they the same? The name Typhon originally belonged to a Titan in Greek mythology who appears as a giant with 100 serpents for his heads and legs. The Titans were primordial beings who existed before the Olympians, such as Zeus, Hera, and Aphrodite, and who were ruled by a god named Kronos. After Zeus dethroned Kronos and took control over the universe, Typhon led the Titans to war against the Olympians. But Zeus overpowered him in battle and buried him alive beneath the earth, from whence he now sends lava and volcanic eruptions. Typhon's mate is the gruesome snake woman Echidna, with whom he sired such terrible chaos monsters as Cerberus and the Chimera. So far, I haven't seen any evidence that the Greeks ever worshipped Typhon, though if anyone out there is aware of any such evidence, please let me know. It would seem that he was only ever worshipped against, much like Apep in the Egyptian religion. However, the name Typhon also became strongly associated with the Egyptian god Set after the New Kingdom fell to foreign invaders during the 8th century BCE. Since Set is the god of all things foreign to Egypt, he was blamed for these invasions as well as for the final dissolution of pharaonic power. So the Egyptians went apeshit and smashed all of his statues, scratched his names off every monument, and killed his sacred animals in excessively cruel ways, such as pushing scared and defenseless donkeys over cliffs. They ceased to believe in him as the savior of Ra, and they equated him with Apep instead. They also persecuted and sometimes killed anyone who either continued to follow Set or was thought to resemble him too much, such as redheads. This eventually led to some of the earliest recorded cases of blood libel, in which Alexandrian Jews were accused of practicing onolatry or donkey worship, as well as poisoning wells and murdering people in their religious rituals. Even Yahweh himself was equated with Set during this period, which meant that Jews and Setians were both being portrayed as something kind of like a pre-Christian satanic cult. By the time guys like Herodotus started writing about the Egyptians in the 5th century BCE, there was far more of Apep to be found in the popular understanding of Set than there was of Set himself. So when Herodotus applied the concept of interpretatio Graecia to the Egyptian pantheon, which means identifying foreign people's gods as Greek gods under different names, he identified this fallacious Set-Apep hybrid with the Typhon of his own culture. Once he made that link, Greco-Egyptian syncretists started calling Big Red Seth Typhon, and people who continued to worship or resemble him became known as Typhonians. This was a term of hostile derision, and classical Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans used it in much the same way that Christians continue to use the words Satanist or devil worshipper today. I'm not a big fan of interpretatio Graecia. I understand why it made sense to the Greeks, but I'm skeptical of it myself, especially in this case. It doesn't take an archaeologist to know the Egyptian Set and the Greek Typhon are almost nothing alike. Sure, there are certain superficial similarities. Both became scary bad guys for a while. But until the 400s BCE at least, it had always been an accepted part of Set's arc that he is a villain turned hero. He also had a proper priesthood of his own and was honored by the pharaohs. This clearly wasn't the case for Typhon, who never enjoyed any kind of state-endorsed following. If Set and Typhon truly are identical, then Typhon's family in Greek mythology should be like a second family that Set has, apart from his Egyptian and Canaanite relatives. Theoretically, at least, this would mean creatures like the Chimera and Cerberus are fellow children of Set, and I should feel some kind of spiritual resonance with them. Theology is not a science, of course, so there's really no way for anyone to be 100% certain of such things. But aside from the complete absence of any lore to this effect, I've never acquired any gnosis that would support this idea. Echidna and her frightening brood just don't feel like they're related to Set at all. And if Set is indeed sterile and incapable of siring any children, as he is often described in Egyptian mythology, how the hell could he procreate with Echidna anyway? Mythology should never be taken literally, I know, but there does need to be some internal consistency at the very least. If Herodotus is correct and Set and Typhon are really the same guy, I would expect there to be stories of Typhon being childless, of Set fathering gigantic monster children, or perhaps even both. However, I must admit I am guilty of using the name Typhon in reference to Set all the time. Isn't this hypocritical? Aren't I blaspheming Big Red by using a name that was given to him out of hatred and fear? Shouldn't I just stick to his Egyptian names and tell Herodotus to get the hell out of Dodge? And shouldn't I have more respect for myself than to accept being called a Typhonian? It has occurred to me that there might be other companions of Set out there who strongly dislike my use of the Typhon moniker. And if this is true, I thank you all for being extremely polite to me, as no one has ever written me any angry emails about this yet. But I actually have several good reasons for sometimes referring to Set as Typhon, despite everything I've explained above. Number 1. It has historical precedent. There are numerous spells in the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri that invoke a Typhon who is not in keeping with the Greek Titan's character at all. The Typhon of the papyri is strongly associated with iron, donkeys, the color red, the great bear, and Hellenized corruptions of Hebrew god names. He's even called Hater of the Wicked in one particular spell, which isn't like the Greek Typhon at all. Furthermore, many of the spells involving Typhon are not malefical or death curses, but are incantations for love, protection, and other varieties of good fortune. Absolutely none of these things are consistent with the Greek Typhon at all, but they are consistent with Set, as he was worshipped prior to the late period. Also, I can personally attest that these spells carry quite a lot of firepower, and that Big Red responds favorably to them. If he didn't like being called Typhon, one would think the spells would fail utterly or have deadly results. There are many different theories as to why magic works, of course, and not all of them are predicated on the assumption that anything supernatural is truly happening. But even if the Greco-Egyptian spells are just exercises in self-hypnotism, their Typhonian procedures are clearly modeled on the Egyptian god Set and not the Greek monster Typhon. Number 2. The word Typhonian pretty much belongs to Set anyway. This term simply didn't exist prior to the emergence of Greco-Egyptian syncretism. When it was first coined, it was used to describe animals that are sacred to Set, including donkeys, fish, hippopotamuses, and people who resonate with him. So while it might be taken from the name of a completely different entity, the word Typhonian has always been used specifically for things that pertain to Set. This is probably due to the original Typhon never having a cultus of his own. In fact, we can really just go right ahead and say that Typhonian is really just a synonym for Setian. Number 3. Typhon is very useful when interacting with academic hair splitters. In the world of academia, the Egyptian Set is often called Seth Typhon, or some variant thereof, to distinguish him from the biblical Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. The latter plays an important role in certain heretical forms of Judaism and Christianity that developed during the latest years BCE and the earliest years CE. These belief systems are often called Sethianism or Sethian Gnosticism, and some scholars will refer to Set as Seth Typhon to distinguish him from this other religion. They also tend to use the word Typhonian for things that pertain to Set, while I more often see Sethian used in discussions of Gnosticism. In a way, this actually kind of stinks. Big Red gets the short end of the stick, while an obscure Bible character who's barely even mentioned in the book of Genesis at all gets preferential treatment. But be that as it may, using the name Typhon in conjunction with Sets is certain to dispel any potential confusion with Sethian Gnosticism, or at least among academics. I should note that some of Big Red's followers think he and the Gnostic Seth really are the same entity. I respectfully disagree with this idea myself, but that's a discussion for another day. Number 4. The meaning of the name Typhon makes perfect sense. Typhon literally means whirlwind in Greek, which ties in with Set's role as a god of wind and storms. The name is also linked to our modern word typhoon, which is the Pacific Ocean's equivalent to a hurricane. Therefore, the name doesn't actually mean anything insulting in and of itself. If anything, it's a totally valid description of Set's jurisdiction in nature. Number 5. The name Typhon describes one of Big Red's much-forgotten aspects. Remember how Set chopped Osiris to pieces and fed his penis to a fish? It may seem ironic that a desert god would be associated with an aquatic animal, but it happens to be the case. Fish, especially those of the Mormiridae or elephant fish family, were held sacred to Set in areas like the town of Oxyrhynchus. Hippopotamuses are also sacred to him, and they are aquatic animals as well, as they spend most of their time in water. So based on Egyptian religion alone, Set most definitely has an aquatic aspect, and Typhon is the perfect name to describe him in this context. Number 6. The name Typhon is a reminder of the evils of Blood Label. The name Typhon was given to Set by people who feared him so much that they were willing to harm innocent animals and people to drive him away. It may seem blasphemous to call him by this name for that very reason, but I find that it's a good way of reminding myself about the evils of Blood Label. The burning times, the Salem witch trials, the satanic panic of the 1980s, these are all different variations of much the same principle that was applied to Setian and Jewish people in Alexandrian Egypt. Remembering these horrific events is a huge part of my spirituality, especially the satanic panic, since I was actually alive while it was still happening. So reclaiming the name Typhon as a positive term for Set and myself is much the same for me as reclaiming a word like witch is for Wiccans. Number 7. Set has never killed me for calling him Typhon. I've been referring to Set as Typhon for a very long time now, and he's never given me any grief about it. I'm pretty confident that if he didn't like me using this name for him, I would be dead by now. Number 8. Who cares about the Greek Typhon's feelings anyway? I've never met a single person who's ever claimed to worship or even care about the Greek Typhon in and of himself, and trust me, I've searched for such a person far and wide. If there are any Hellenic Reconstructionists out there who worship Typhon and who happen to stumble upon this sermon, I do hope that they will share their thoughts on this with me. Whenever I meet anyone who works with something they call Typhon, the entity they're experiencing always turns out to be Set upon closer inspection, except perhaps in the case of Kenneth Grant, whose draconian female Typhon strikes me as being a misidentified version of the hippo goddess Taweret. If the original Typhon has no cult to speak of, and if the Greeks themselves gave his name to Set, then why should I care? Does anyone even care that I'm talking about this? So are Set and Typhon one and the same entity? Pan-culturalists might say yes, and hard polytheists might say no, but who can ever know for sure? All I know is, Set and Typhon don't seem the same to me, but this doesn't mean the two figures can't share the same name. If there can be more than one Seth, why on earth can't there be more than one Typhon?
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this sermon and you'd like to read some more, please check out desertofset.com. I hope you have a wonderful day. Set bless.